specifically replenishing your cup. So that was last week. This week, we focus on how you interface with others. We're going to examine 3 models during the course of the webinar this evening. The first 2 models are actually original models, which I developed myself as part of writing the book. So you'll see my model on the components of trust. You'll also see my model on relationship building blocks. The third model that I will share with you is not an original, but it is an invaluable addition to your toolkit. I can tell you that from experience, and I look forward to hearing your feedback on all 3 models as we go through the webinar. So we start out with an opinion poll. So once you become a manager, you can demand compliance, but you must earn commitment. Is that true or is it false? So Carissa, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and open up the poll, and I'll ask all of our attendees to weigh in on this opinion poll. Okay, we're going to give you just a few more seconds to jump in on this, and then we'll share the answer with you. Okay, remember the polling is anonymous, and just have fun with it. What do you think? There's no penalty for expressing your opinion. All right, so we have 80% have weighed in. And Carissa, because we have so much to cover this evening, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and close the poll. Excellent. So here are the results for you. Once you become a manager, you can demand compliance, but you must earn commitment. 74% of the respondents said that that is true. 26% said that it was false. So the majority is actually correct in this instance. It is true. And on the screen before you, to the right of your screen, you will see the hierarchy of commitment. And so I invite you to turn your attention to the bottom of the pyramid, to the base of the pyramid, and that is the lowest possible level of commitment. So you're not committed at all. And how does that manifest? You have employees who will simply say, I'm not going to do it. Maybe some employees are not quite that bold. So maybe you have children who tell you, I'm not going to do it. The thing with the non-committal is that in addition to not doing it themselves, not following the rules themselves, they can also influence others to do the same. Okay, so clearly that's not where you want your team to be. The next level up, you will have those who complain. So they may do it, but they do it begrudgingly. The next level up is compliance, and these people do it because they have to do it, because you're in a position of authority over them. They perhaps have concerns about the adverse consequences of not being compliant. So that's the next level up. The ultimate level, the pinnacle, the top of the pyramid is commitment. I will do it. And not only that, but I will lead others to do it as well. So commitment is more desirable than compliance. And I want to share with you a pitfall of compliance, because there's this thing that's called malicious compliance. So if you've heard of malicious compliance, go ahead and type yes in the chat box for us. In the meantime, I will tell you that malicious compliance is so popular that there's a Reddit group with almost 1 million members. people talking about examples of malicious compliance. And sometimes it's hilarious, but other times it can really cause problems for the organization. So what exactly is malicious compliance? Malicious compliance pertains to following the rules even when common sense tells you it's not the appropriate thing to do. And why would somebody do that? Perhaps to get back at a manager who has been a stickler for the rules, or there's some other tension and that's the employee's way of acting out. So what might be an example of malicious compliance? So let's say you have a policy within your organization that you have to submit a claim for reimbursement, for example, for gas money, or if you worked past a certain time, you claim back for your dinner or something like that. Now, if an employee is really committed, if they just went on a drive that's 10 minutes away and they figure, listen, that's hardly any gas, it's not worth the paperwork for me to submit a claim for that. Okay, so you would not comply with the rule to submit claims for reimbursement. However, if you had a manager who was giving you a hard time and had exercised no discretion when enforcing rules, you might complete that paperwork to claim $2, $1.50, knowing well that it would cost a lot more to process the application than the settlement would be. So that would be an example of malicious compliance. Another example of malicious compliance, so in terms of submitting overtime claims. So if you work beyond a certain time, you're entitled to submit a claim for overtime. But if you're committed to the organization and I came in late a couple of times, so I'll just net it off. But then if your boss starts docking you pay for being 5 minutes late, malicious compliance could see you putting in an overtime claim if you stayed 5 minutes behind your regular hours. So those are a couple examples of malicious compliance, and to help to highlight the difference between compliance and commitment. So let's advance our discussions, highlighting the difference between commitment and compliance. So as a boss, as I mentioned previously, you can demand compliance, but commitment is something that has to be earned. And how do you earn commitment? Via trust. If your team members trust you, if your direct reports trust you, if your peers and your boss trust you, you will see that they're willing to go the extra mile for you. So how do you, the previous slide says the coin of the realm is trust. So how do you get that coin? How do you get trust from your team members? And the answer to that lies in the law of the harvest. I don't know if you're familiar with the law of the harvest, but it simply states you can't harvest what you haven't planted. So if you like mangoes and you plant a sugar apple tree, don't look up in the sugar apple tree expecting it to give you mangoes. In order for you to reap, you need to sow what it is you want to reap. So if you want trust from those that you're seeking to lead, you need to be trustworthy yourself. And you also need to show them in tangible ways by your words and by your actions that you trust them. And it might seem counterintuitive, and especially if you've operated in a team where there were some tensions, a lot of conflict and dysfunctional conflict, that is. You may say, I'm not going to be trusting these people. Well, you see, you are setting the tone. If you're sowing the seeds of distrust, you cannot expect to reap a harvest of trust. And so in order for you to have your people trust you, you must show up as being trustworthy, and you must show them that you trust them. What are the benefits of that approach? Okay, so we have a list here, and this is based on unpublished research. So compared with people at low trust organizations, people in high trust companies report 74% less stress. And for those of you who were with us last week or listened to the recording from last week, you will recall that in a survey that I did of Caribbean professionals, our stress levels are very high. We had 42% of Caribbean professionals participating in the survey saying that they were stressed, and another 37% said that they were stretched. If there's trust in a relationship within the organization, the stress levels are reduced. Look at the energy levels. Last week, we also spoke about taking care of yourself, ensuring that you got enough sleep, enough rest, exercise, etc. Persons who operate within a high trust environment report having more energy at work. And look at it, significantly more than double the energy levels of people who describe their organization as being low trust. 50% higher productivity. Which organization would say no to 50% higher productivity? Okay, 13% fewer sick days. The number in terms of the percentage is a little less, but still, that also goes to your productivity and to your bottom line if your people aren't calling in sick as often. 76% more engagement. Now, employee engagement enables you to leverage what we call discretionary effort, people being willing and able to go above and beyond. So you can ask them to work a little extra and they won't necessarily look for an immediate compensation for it because they feel that they're part of something bigger. They want to make the contribution. They trust you. They want to support you. So 76% more employee engagement in high trust environments, 29% more satisfaction with their lives overall. So having a trusting environment in work shows benefits not just for the organization and not just in the organization, but it spills out to your life outside of that. And finally, 40% less burnout in organizations where there are higher levels of trust. So if you're anything like most of us, you can see the value of having trust within your team. So here's another opinion poll. When it comes to trust, it's an all or nothing situation. Either you trust somebody or you don't. True or false? So I invite you to go ahead and weigh in with this poll. Oh, great. You guys are quick on the trigger this time around. Wonderful. Interesting to see how the balance is going. Okay, give you just a few more seconds before we close the poll. Again, because we have so much to cover this evening. All right, so Carissa, please go ahead and close the poll for me. And here we have the results. So 76% of you think that it is true. So trust is an all or nothing situation. And the minority, 24%, think that it is false. Well, the minority have it right. This is, in fact, false. Trust is not an all or nothing situation. And I'm going to use my model to illustrate that point. So if I say, for example, I don't trust Carissa, what does that mean? Could mean that perhaps I think Carissa is an old thief, so I wouldn't have my money around her. Or it could mean that, I think Carissa means me harm, or it could mean that she's inconsistent. It could mean so many different things. And it's important to be clear on where the breakdown is if we are going to address a trust deficit. So the model that you see before you, as I indicated, is an original model that I've developed. And from my experience over the years, I have identified these 4 components of trust. And I'm going to take you through each one in turn, and we're going to talk about how the symptoms of that type of deficit, and also how you can correct that type of deficit. So we'll start with competence. So in terms of competence, does the person have the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities to do what needs to be done? If not, then your trust deficit is around competence. So for example, if you have a report that needs to be done and you say, give it to Karen, you say, no, I don't trust Karen to do this. It could be because you don't think that Karen has the knowledge, the skills, or the ability to complete the report to the quality standard that you need. Now, why does this make a difference? Because your remedy for a competency deficit is different than if the deficit is due to a character flaw. With a competency deficit, as I said, it's because of a lack of knowledge, skill, or ability. Therefore, you can train to close that gap, you can coach to close that gap, and you can work with the person to support them so that they develop the knowledge, the skills, and the ability to close the gap. Remember I said about the law of the harvest. The way for you to inspire trust is for you yourself to be trustworthy. So in addition to thinking about whether or not the people with whom you work are competent, you need to ask yourself, am I showing up as a competent person? Am I showing up as knowledgeable? Am I showing up as being skilled? Am I showing up as being able to do my job? And be honest with yourself. We spoke last week about self-awareness. We also spoke about self-regulation. So if, as you engage in the introspection, you realize, okay, there's some things that I need to be better at in terms of my knowledge, skills, and abilities. If you are to succeed as a manager, if you are to inspire trust in your people, you need to seek to close your own competency gaps. And of course, you need to, as a manager, as a supervisor, you also need to work to close the competency gaps of those with who report to you. So Carissa, before I go on to character, anything showing up in the chat that I need to address?
No, we can proceed.
Okay, so the second element that contributes to trust is character. And this, is an old-fashioned word. It refers to whether or not you're a good person, you have integrity, honesty, those types of traits. What is the nature of your character? What is the nature of the character of those who report to you, your peers, your boss? If you don't think that these people have good character, if they're not honest, if they're not respectful, if they're, they don't have integrity, that's a significant deficit. And personally, I think this is the biggest and most difficult deficit to overcome. Because if somebody shows up to work, they get a job, the thing is their personality's been formed, their character been formed, they're an adult. So if they show up with a flawed character, that's not going to change overnight. So when you have a character deficit, that really can be problematic. So a trust deficit that's associated with character is extremely hard to overcome. And especially if the individual in question doesn't admit that there's an issue with the dishonesty, with stealing, with integrity, with all the other things that make up good character. And of course, remember, it begins with you. What is your character like? How are you showing up? Are you showing up as being honest, trustworthy? Are you inspiring confidence in your people as a result of your own character? Okay, Okay, and again, we encourage you to use the chat box if you have any questions or you want to weigh in on this. So I've indicated that I think character is the hardest deficit to overcome. Once I've gone through the whole model, I'd love to hear from you in terms of what do you think. So the next one is benevolence. And this is a lovely old-fashioned word. And what benevolence means is that somebody means you well. You know, some people that you don't know why, but they just don't like your head. They, for some reason, they have this antipathy towards you. Are you going to trust that person? So if there is no benevolence, if you do not think that someone means you well, chances are you will be reluctant to trust them. Years and years ago, I was in a certain organizational context, and one of my peers, and this was someone who was in accounting, I needed to rely on her for certain reports. And it happened once, it happened twice, happened more than twice, that I got reports that had inaccurate information in them, and I was making decisions and I was doing presentations based on inaccurate data. No, like I tell you, it happened once, it happened twice, it happened more than twice. And I said to myself, I wonder if this person is setting me up by giving me bad information. No, it could have been that she made a mistake, but I perceived her to be a competent person. So I said, no, she's good at what she does. So why is it that I get reports from her and they have errors in them? And so I came to the conclusion, okay, there's a benevolence issue. For some reason, she doesn't mean me well. So when there's a benevolence related trust gap, that too can be difficult to overcome. And if someone doesn't mean you well, you can't force them to mean you well, but what you can do is safeguard by being very diligent. So every report that I got from that individual going forward, I checked and double checked before I made any decisions based on it or before I presented it to anyone else as part of my work. So that's if someone doesn't have benevolence towards you. Now, remember, trust goes in both directions. What about if you have a direct report or a peer or a boss who thinks that you don't mean them well? Can you see how that may have implications for how the two of you interact and how the work gets done or not? So benevolence is the third component of trust. And the fourth and final component is consistency. People need to be able to rely on you. You need to be able to rely on people. And the consistency can be related to the competence as well. So you have a particular direct report. Sometimes they do their job, very, very well, exceed your expectation. And the next day, you want to, what on earth is going on? Why is there this, drastic fall off in terms of performance? Consistency also applies to benevolence. Sometimes, the person looks as if they're looking out for you, supporting you. Other times you wonder, what's going on here? Are you doing this just to undermine me? So those are the four components that go together to make up trust. So remember the poll question, if trust was an all or nothing variable. So it absolutely is not, because you can have the most competent person in the world who has a good character, who means you well, but they're just totally unreliable. You can't say for sure that they're going to be where they say they're going to be. They're going to do what they say they're going to do. So that's a consistency issue. Or you can have someone who has a competency gap. Again, that's the easiest to close. Train them, coach them, mentor them, help them to acquire the knowledge, skills, and ability. All right. Anything in the chat box on the trust model, Carissa?
We have quite a lot of activity. The first one is a question. Someone is asking if reporting to work on time is a character trait.
If you know the rules, you signed a contract to comply with the rules in terms of these are your hours of work, and you consistently show up late, your manager should have a conversation with you in terms of what's going on, because there may be extenuating circumstances in terms of childcare, etc. But then you have an obligation to put arrangements in place to overcome that. So it depends on your attitude towards the tardiness, because if you're very laissez-faire about it, very blasé, late, so what? Then yes, that could possibly be a character flaw. But don't jump to that immediate conclusion. Eliminate the other possibilities before going there. Because like I said, a character flaw is one of the most difficult things for you to overcome.
Okay, we have another question touching on the component of benevolence. The question is, shouldn't you raise your perception with the individual? And I think that's related to the example that you gave.
Okay, so that's an option. Okay, but when you don't have trust, when you don't trust an individual, and this one is so fundamental, because if I concluded that the individual didn't mean me well, you think she's going to admit that to me? So I opted, you know what? If that is the case, she's not, because clearly when the errors were identified, I went to the individual and pointed them out. And in each case it was, oh my dear, I'm so sorry. But again, because I knew the person to be highly competent, the frequency of it really caused me to wonder. And so I made a judgment call. She had the opportunity to say, listen, yes, I gave you bad data, because it didn't happen. So I just decided to focus on what I could control and influence, and that is to ensure that I double checked whatever was given to me.
Okay, the other remark is, I think the character deficit is the most difficult to overcome.
Yeah.
And we have a question, wouldn't a person's benevolence be a direct indication of their character?
Not necessarily, no, because even the wickedest people love people. Right? So, I mean, yeah, you can feel goodwill towards someone and still be a general. All right?
The final remark is, I think benevolence is the hardest one to change.
Okay, I can see a case for that. I really can. All right, thank you so very much. And I'll also invite you to put in the chat box if you think there's anything missing from my model. Is there another component of trust that you can think of that is not covered by the four that I have listed there? All right, so while you think about that, and go ahead and put anything that you might have on that in the chat box, I'm going to move on because the time just goes so quickly. So the next model, and this is my second model that I'm going to be sharing with you this evening, this one is for relationship building blocks. What is it that you need in order to construct a solid, mutually beneficial relationship? Okay, so this is my relationship building block model. And if you notice, trust is one of the building blocks, and it's right there in the foundation. So we've just gone through trust. So we're going to pick up with the next building block, which is effective communication. So I love this quotation from George Bernard Shaw. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Because just because you say something, just because you send an email, doesn't mean that communication has taken place. And why is that? Because effective communication includes a feedback loop. Communication occurs when you have shared meaning or understanding. It doesn't mean that you have to agree, but you need to ensure that what the message sent is the same as the message received. And so often, the two messages are miles apart. So as you can see from this diagram, communication originates with a sender. And this is a very simplified diagram because, you know, I haven't showed things like coding and encoding and decoding and the different types of channels you can use for communication. Just very high level to illustrate the importance of the feedback component. So the sender sends a message to a receiver, and the receiver feeds back to the sender so as to ensure that there is shared meaning or understanding. Okay, so in your communication, typically, how often are you ensuring that you have a feedback loop? If you're not, that's something that you need to think about. And what are some of the ways that you could check to ensure that you have shared understanding? So if you're having a conversation, it's really easy. So you can ask questions to check for understanding. You can ask if it's clear to the person. You can have them, feed it back to you to ensure that they did get from the message what you intended. Uh, if you're using written correspondence, again, it's good to get the feedback and acknowledgement, invite people to question you if they're not clear on what the message that you have sent to them. So don't fall prey to that myth, that problem of thinking that communication has taken place when in fact it has not. So use your feedback loop. All right. The next building block now is mindset. Having a positive mindset is truly important. And mindset is something that has become more popular in recent times. All right. It's not something that, when I first went into the workforce that people were talking about mindset, but right now it is fairly common. And what exactly do we mean by mindset? It is your thoughts, your attitudes, and your beliefs. And those thoughts, attitudes, and beliefs actually influence your actions. And I found this little quotation here. Your mind is a garden. Your thoughts are the seeds so you can grow flowers or you can grow weeds. And that comes down to mindset. So if you have negative thoughts, negative beliefs, then they would probably show up as negative actions and negative attitudes. So I'm going to show you a couple pairs in terms of mindsets that you can have. Excuse me. So your mindset can be opened or closed. All right. If you have a closed mindset, you know what you know, you believe what you believe, your attitude is your attitude, and you're not interested in learning anything else or in changing anything. Okay. So it's fine if the mindset is positive, but suppose it's not. So, we have an expression where we say that your spirit just don't take somebody. That would be an example of having a closed mindset where you just have a negative attitude towards the person. They can try and try and try in order to win you over, but you're not budging. So an open mindset is receptive to change. A closed mindset is not. Here's another binary pair. You can have a learning mindset or a safeguarding mindset. Some people that when they graduate from school, whether it's secondary school or university or whatever, they think they know it, that's it, they've learned all they need to learn. And from there on in, they simply protect what they know, as opposed to having a learning mindset where every day has the potential to bring you new knowledge, new awareness, a different way of seeing things, a different way of doing things. Okay, so that's learning versus safeguarding. Another binary option is a probing mindset or a steadfast mindset. And so I love the probing mindset. It's all about curiosity. So you know things, you have beliefs, you have knowledge, you have certain attitudes, but still you're curious to find out, what else is out there? What else could it be? Okay, this is what I think might be happening, but what else? So probing, you can think curiosity versus steadfast, which is similar to safeguarding. I know what I know, and that's what I'm sticking with. And the final pair is promotion versus prevention. So this mindset, this pair, you can think about it as your attitude towards risk. So If you are focused on prevention, if you have a prevention mindset, you're extremely risk averse. So again, you want to safeguard what you know. You're not trying any of this new stuff. In contrast, now, if you have a promotion mindset, you're willing to venture out, try new things, and see what kind of return you get on them. So that's mindset within the relationship building block models. Carissa, I'm checking in to see if there are any questions coming up or comments.
No questions or comments at this time.
Okay, great. So far in the relationship building blocks, we have trust, we have sorry, going in the wrong direction, effective communication, and we have a positive mindset. The next one up is respect. Now, we all want to receive respect, but not everyone wants to give it. So remember, with mindset, we spoke about attitudes, right? Respect begins with attitude and it manifests in behavior. So if you have a negative attitude towards someone, inevitably it's going to show up in your behavior at some point in time. Okay? When we respect others, we consider them to be important, we value them, we honor them. That does not mean that we have to agree with them. We can respect others without believing what they believe, without doing the things that they do. It's a matter of valuing and honoring them as individuals and acknowledging that they have a right to their own beliefs and that you should not in any way diminish them because their beliefs are different than yours. Okay, so that's respect. Going back to the model now, we have empathy. Empathy is so significant. We spoke about it last week when we looked at emotional intelligence, and we're going to look at it again here. Very simple definition. Empathy is recognizing and appreciating how other people feel. So as human beings, we there's a tendency to be very egocentric. So we see the world from our lens, from our perspective. But we just spoke about respect and acknowledging that people may have different perspectives. Empathy is about recognizing and appreciating that. And so if you are empathetic, you're able to articulate understanding of another person's perspective and to behave in a way that respects their feelings. And so I love this little diagram here. So with empathy, we seek first to understand and then to be understood. That's empathy. Too often we focus on being understood, so on putting our message across. With empathy, we step back and we hear from the other person. And it's coming from a place where you're able to articulate understanding of what the other person's position is, that you can then share your perspective in a respectful way. All right, so empathy. And then that brings us to the pinnacle of my relationship building block model, which is the platinum rule. Now, practically everyone knows the golden rule, okay? It's straight from the Bible, it's from Matthew. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And so please don't think that I'm a heretic in terms of rejecting scripture. Yes, I understand and appreciate the golden rule. However, when it comes to building relationships, I have a concern about the golden rule, and it relates back to empathy. If we adhere exclusively to the golden rule, in essence, what we're saying is that everyone thinks and feels the way that we do, because we say we're going to treat them the way that we want to be treated. Well, what if they don't want to be treated the way that we want to be treated? And so that brings into play the element of diversity. So the formula that I use is that the golden rule plus diversity gives you the platinum rule. And I'll tell you a quick story about the difference between the golden rule and the platinum rule. And some of you on the webinar will be familiar with this story because you lived it with me. There was a time when I was an HR manager for a certain organization, and we designed a performance incentive program. So we were rewarding and recognizing employees. And so the prizes were some fabulous prizes. I mean, we had day passes, we had massages, manicures, really fantastic stuff. Notice my language. And somehow, the folks that I had designed all these wonderful prizes for were somewhat less than appreciative. They weren't sufficiently motivated by the prizes. I couldn't for the life of me understand why, because after all, the prizes were fantastic. I chose them myself. So we had a focus group and we asked persons to tell us what would be motivational for you. What would you like to get as the award for being employee of the quarter or whatever it was? And if I had guessed 1,000,000 times what the most popular request would be, I still wouldn't have gotten it because it was just so remote from my reality. And that thing was they wanted my executive parking space under the building. No, I took that for granted. So I wasn't going to think about giving anyone that as a prize. But diversity. Their reality was that every morning they had to come into St. John's and hunt for parking. It meant getting the kids up extra early to go to school so that they could get down while there was still parking available. So again, empathy, diversity, and we land on the platinum rule, which is treat others the way they want to be treated. All right, so let's see how well you retained the relationship building blocks. Which one of these is not part of my relationship building block model? Is it trust? Is it respect? Is it understanding? Or is it empathy? So I'm going to ask, please remember to keep your microphones muted, and you can fill in your response with the poll that is now before you. We're going to leave the poll up for a minute because we are really cutting time close tonight, and I still have one more model to show you.
While they respond to that, I am going to share this remark in the chat box with you, which is that most persons have difficulty understanding that you can still respect them and work well with them, even if you disagree with them.
True, true. And so as manager, as leaders, that's a conversation that you need to be able to navigate. That's a conversation you need to be able to have. And emotional intelligence will help you to do just that.
There's another remark which is challenging you that says, is it really possible to treat people the way they want to be treated? Using the example you gave, you only had one parking.
Okay, but there was only one winner every quarter, every month, whatever it was, right? Besides, what I did, I wasn't going to suffer by myself. So I went to my executive colleagues and I negotiated with them that we would take turns giving up our parking space. So each month a different executive made the sacrifice, and so it was okay. So again, see the mindset. So if we come from a mindset that's open and says we can figure out a way to make this happen, the outcome will be different, as opposed to a closed mindset saying, nah, that's not going to work. All right, so Carissa, could you please go ahead and close down the poll so that we can see the results? Okay, so this is, Carissa, why are you laughing?
We have another interesting comment, which I'll share after you respond to the poll.
Okay, so I feel very good in that 94% of you got this answer right. So the one that doesn't belong, like we're in Sesame Street now, which one of these things doesn't belong here, is understanding. Whereas understanding is important to have successful relationship, it was not one of the building blocks. It's an element within empathy. It also comes into play in respect, but it is not a building block on its own. So we had just one person saying respect and one person saying empathy. They are definitely building blocks. So thank you so very much for that. So yes, Carissa, I'm so curious now to hear what has you tickled so.
I really got caught off guard with this one. And the question is, what if the person has a God complex and wants to be treated as though they're a king or a queen? And they added, some managers or supervisors want you to worship them.
Okay, so the language is the language is interesting. And, you know, I would question the mindset, because do we really have human beings in the workplace who want to be worshipped? Worshipped. So clearly the intention is not to, because we're supposed to worship God and that's it. All right, when it comes to worshiping. So clearly that is not what we're proposing. What we're saying is that bear in mind that everyone is not like you in terms of attitudes, beliefs, and preferences. So factor diversity into consideration when you're dealing with your direct reports, with your peers, with your bosses. Okay, don't expect everyone to be a clone of you, is what I'm saying. Okay, thanks for that, Carissa, and thanks to the person for asking the question. All right, I am going to speed up because we have one more. So go ahead and put into the chat box. You can see the entire model there. What do you think is missing? Go ahead and put that in the chat box, and Carissa, towards the end, if anything comes in, you can let me know. But right now I'm going to go to the third model, which is our final model this evening, and it is situational leadership. So, and again, this is not an original model, it's from Ken Blanchard. So situational leadership is about matching your management style to the performance readiness of the person that you're seeking to lead. I said, I think it was in the first webinar, if all you have is a hammer, you're going to go around treating everything as if it's a nail. All right, the outcome is not going to be optimal. So there are 4 quadrants that I'm going to take you through, 4 levels of readiness, and then share with you the appropriate leadership style for someone who is at that level of readiness. So the first level, which is the lowest level of readiness, is someone who is unable and unwilling to do the task at hand. So as you can see from the bullet points, the employee doesn't know what to do and they're afraid to make a mistake. Okay, so that contributes to unwillingness. Your management or leadership style there would be telling or guiding the person. Your focus is on the task that needs to be completed. They don't know how to do it, so you utilize your knowledge and your experience to provide direction, to make decisions, and to stimulate the person to action. Telling, oh, there's a typo there, telling or guiding. Okay, so what might be an example of someone who is unable and unwilling in a workplace? Go ahead and put that in the chat box for us.
We have someone saying effective communication.
No, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. My question was, what might be a circumstance where an employee would show up as being unable and unwilling to do a task? Okay, so I've shared with you an example here. So you may have a summer intern who they took the job because they want to make a little change while they're on vacation, but really they've been working hard for the former semester. They just finished some hard exam, turned in some papers. They would like to sleep in late every morning, but instead they got to get up and come to this job. and they're unable because they don't know your systems, they don't know your processes. So they're both unable and unwilling. Or you may have a reluctant new hire, maybe somebody who was transferred from another department, so they didn't really want to come to your department. They don't know, what exactly you do there, how you do it. So those are two examples of individuals who will show up as being unable and unwilling. And again, the way you would deal with them is that you would focus on the task. You will tell them how to do the task, guide them how to do the task, drawing on your own experience. Okay, so that's the lowest level of performance readiness. Second level, person is still unable, but now they're willing. So this would be,
Before you go into that, I just wanted to share with you what the participants are saying relating to the first topic. Just a few of them. We have subordination, newly promoted new workers, when they have experienced constant criticism for their work and feel as though their efforts are never good enough. And let's see if there's something new. Asking an employee to perform an assignment that they have not done before. Someone says, regardless of the task, the employee would have a reason for why a task wasn't completed.
Okay, so that's a different conversation there, because that speaks to unwillingness, but I'm not sure where the ability is. So I'd like to have a deeper conversation for that last example. But thank you so much for sharing those illustrations. So second level now, they're still unable, but this time they're willing. So this is an employee who is not sure what to do, but they're eager to learn. And so how do you interact with that employee? You're doing selling in terms of the interaction is both with the employee and with the task. So if you think of it as a decision about whether to focus on the task or on the relationship, in this case, you're going to focus both on the task and on the relationship. Why? You want to encourage them because they're willing. So you want to keep that motivation going. And you also want to focus on the task because they don't know how to do the task. So you're going to focus on the task, explain to them how to do the task. At the same time, you're ensuring that you keep their motivation levels up. Okay, encourage their enthusiasm. So again, examples of an employee who may show up as unable but willing. Okay, you can go ahead and type it in the chat, but in the interest of time, I'm going to give you my example. So you may have a highly motivated new hire who doesn't know your organizational policies and procedures, but they're excited about the new job. They've wanted to work there forever, so they're happy that they're there. So they're very willing. So you just need to focus on keeping that motivation level up as you introduce them to the policies and the procedures. Any input from our participants, Carissa, on unable but willing?
No comments at this time.
Okay, so we go to the third level now. This time, the first two were unable. This time we have somebody who is able, but they're not willing. So they know how to do it. Good understanding of what to do, but not sure if they want to do it on their own. So in this case, the appropriate style would be to participate and to involve. So your focus here is not on the task anymore, because we've established they know how to do the task. So your focus is on the relationship. You want to draw them out. You want to tap into, okay, what is impacting their level of motivation and how can I involve them in a way that can get past that hurdle? So the leader focuses primarily on the relationship and less on the task because the employee already knows how to do the task. So an example here might be an experienced employee who lacks self-confidence. And earlier on, someone says that, somebody may have gotten like negative feedback before, and that could have an impact on their level of confidence. So they may show up, even though they know how to do this, they're unwilling because they're concerned that they might be embarrassed, that you might, give them some uncomplimentary feedback. So able and unwilling, The appropriate approach is participating or involving, and this means that you're focusing on relationship and less so on the task. And the fourth and final level of performance readiness relates to someone who is both able and willing. Okay, and the appropriate way to manage such an individual is to delegate to them and to entrust them to get the job done. These are your people who are motivated, they're competent, they're confident, so trust them to get the job done. Okay, so this is what you do with your high performers. So those are the four quadrants, the four levels of performance readiness, and the approaches that you should use in each instance. Anything in the chat before I go on, because we're going to have a little poll?
We have someone saying that could be a disgruntled employee. And someone
Which one?
sharing,
Able and with? Probably for the earlier one. This
I think
one.
that is for
Yes.
R3.
Yeah. Okay.
Also for R3, I have someone saying, no, this is for R4. Able and unwilling sounds like the person who might have had their work criticized before or lacking in confidence.
Yeah, that's R3. R3. Yeah, unwilling. Okay.
And also for R3, an employee willing to learn from other departments during slow periods to broaden their knowledge.
R3 is unwilling. So if you're unwilling, you're not going to be going out looking for additional work to do. So remember, the two things you have to look at are the ability and willingness. The willingness is more attitudinal, whereas the ability relates to the knowledge and skills. All right, so here's the model in its entirety. So you see at the bottom of the model, it has the performance readiness, and at the top, it shows on the X and Y axis, you have task behavior and relationship behavior. So as you mentioned, in R1, it's telling. That is where you're going to focus, high level of focus on the task, a little less on the relationship. These unable and unwilling folks, that's the lowest level of readiness. Then in R2, you're going to have high focus on the task, high focus on the relationship. This person is willing, but they're unable. Then in the third quadrant, the blue one, you're going to be participating, and that's for an individual who is able but unwilling. So your focus is not going to be on the task, but it's going to be on the relationship. And then in the fourth and final quadrant, you have somebody who's both able and willing, and your approach should be that of delegation. So question for you. If you choose the incorrect approach for the four categories, what might happen? So for example, if you have somebody who's both able and willing, so they are in performance readiness level 4, the highest level, but you are treating them as if they're in readiness level 1, what might be their response? Okay, anything coming up in the chat, Cursor?
You can push them to another level. They will resent you and become demotivated. Another comment, demotivation. You may push them to leave the organization. They may become disengaged.
Absolutely. And that's how some of you get the reputation of being micromanagers. The people know what they have to do. They're able and willing, and you keep butting in. So note to self, figure out performance readiness level, and then adopt the appropriate way of dealing with that individual. So let's see how well you have internalized this. Knowledge poll. What is the appropriate leadership style for an experienced employee who lacks self-confidence? So go ahead and jump right in, start answering the poll. Excellent. apologize. I've gone a little bit over. So I thank you for your understanding.
And while they're doing that, I'll share this comment with you. Someone shared that the person may feel frustrated or micromanaged.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, if you put yourself in that position, when you know what you have to do, you're willing to do it, and you have a boss that just is constantly over your shoulders. Okay, so Carissa, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and close the poll because we're already a little past the 8 o'clock hour, so I don't want to inconvenience our folks anymore. So we had 79% of you with the correct answer, which is participating. So in terms of why participating is the right answer, let me just eliminate the others. So remember, telling, you use that when the person is unable and unwilling. Selling, you use that when they're willing but unable, and delegating you use when they're both able and willing. So participating, that's when there's a lack of willingness but the ability is there. Your focus is on the relationship as opposed to the task. All right, so there we are. We have covered in a slightly longer session this evening 3 models, the 4 components of trust, the relationship building blocks, and situational leadership. And it's back over to you, Carissa.
Okay, we are at the end of our session. It's been a great session. Thank you for being so actively engaged. The ambassador mentioned that we're inviting you to complete a short survey to capture your feedback. I'm going to share that link with you in the comment box. But just to note, you usually have 24 hours to complete the survey. This evening you have 1 hour, and we're practicing the principle of scarcity. Some of you may remember that from earlier webinar. We're sharing an exclusive gift with you that once you've completed the survey, we'll share with you. However, in order to claim the gift, you must complete the evaluation form within an hour. We're also not sharing the slides with you, so we encourage you to complete the evaluation form, claim your free gift, so that you can have that tool with you and reference it in your day-to-day lives as leaders and leaders in training. To contact us in the future, follow us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, send us an email, or visit our website. The links to these platforms, I'm going to share them in the chat box. I do want to capture your feedback. However, I'm going to ask that any final remarks that you have to make, please share it with us via email so that the survey link and contact information don't get lost in comments in the chat box. And I will leave the webinar open for a few minutes longer so that everyone can have access to the information I am about to share. There we go. Thank you once again. Feel free to leave as soon as you've gotten the information. Reminder, please, at this point, don't share anything else in the chat box. Email us at info@utdsinc.com and we will get back to you, just to make sure that everyone can see the survey link and the contact information and it doesn't get lost in the comments.